Guys, welcome back to Cityscape Brewing. I'm Dennis Fields, and today I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into the Mash Sparge calculator. I've gotten a couple of comments with people that really want to go a little bit more in depth in learning how to do that. Say you're getting from extract brewing into all grain brewing, and you're going to need to put in your grains, find out what your mash and sparge temperatures and water amounts are going to be, and this calculator that I use is going to help you do that. So with that, grab a beer, hit that like and subscribe button. Stay tuned.
All right, so right here we're at the website that I use for my calculator. It's brewger.com, BREWGR.com. I am not sponsored in any way. This is just a calculator I've always used, and it's worked out really, really well for me, so I continue to use it. Probably the closest one that matches my brew setup. So you'll find a table up here. You'll want to hover over Tools, and then you'll go to the Mash Sparge Water Infusion Calculator. And then you'll have to click off an ad probably, and then you'll be able to put in your inputs. In this case, it gives you the option right away of whether you're using US or metric measurements. I use US, and then it comes down and you can put in your specific items below. I do want to touch very briefly on the equipment profile section here. This is set up already for you, and Brewger does a pretty good job of what these should actually be. I don't change these specifically, but if you find that later on, if you get a couple brews in your belt, that slightly altering one of these works better for your setup, you can choose to do that. So here you have grain absorption. That's essentially how much water your dry grains are going to soak up. You have sparge grain absorption. At this point, your grains should already be wet from your mash, and so there's very little there. HTL, which is your hot liquor tank to Mash Tun heat loss, is 0 in this case, but you may need to add that if you have a pump. And so transferring that through a hose may eliminate some heat, and so you may need to add some there if you use a pump. Mash Tun loss, this is essentially the amount of water or wort that you can't transfer from the bottom of your mash tun because your spigot is a little bit higher than the bottom. And so in this case, they account for about a quarter of a gallon. Then there's brew trub loss. That's essentially the amount of hops or other adjuncts soaking up some liquid, and then also, again, that amount that is below the spigot on your brew kettle. And then boil loss, this is typical. You'll do about a gallon of loss at a rapid boil per hour, and then wort shrinkage, as you cool it down, the volume gets smaller. So I don't change these, but you can choose to alter those if you'd like to. We're going to go ahead and alter these, and then it ultimately kicks out your calculated totals here on the other side as we change these. So we're going to just put in a random grain weight of, say 12 pounds. We're going to go ahead and talk about our grain temperature. This is just using a thermometer. I use a digital thermometer. I stick it right in my grains, see what the room temperature is if you keep it inside versus your garage or whatever. This is going to affect, when you pour in the water, your grain temperature affects the outcome of your mash temperature. So you want to know what your grain temp is. In this case, we'll just use, room temperature of say 70 degrees. And we're going to talk about mash temperature. Mash temperature is really important when you're talking about beers. Everything from, the upper 140s to the upper 150s, 140, 5 or 8, all the way up to 158 for your target mash. The higher that mash temperature, the more malty mouthfeel you'll have. The lower, the more crisp and refreshing crisp flavors you'll have, I guess, and less mouthfeel and grain flavor. And so the sweet spot where you have a little bit of both is about 152. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. That's very common for like a pale ale or IPA. Then we get into mash thickness. This is essentially how thick your mash is going to be with your grains and your water all together. So in this case, very common between 1.25 and I use 1.33, and we'll kind of show you the difference between how much water you'll need for your strike water versus sparge water based on this mash thickness. I tend to go a little bit more in my mash, so therefore I have a little bit less that I have to put in my sparge. That's because I have a smaller Rubbermaid container that I use to hold my water for my strike water. or my Sparge water, excuse me, and it only holds about 5.5 gallons total. So I try to use 1.33 here. It works out perfectly for me, but you can play around with that if you like. Total boil time typically is a 60-minute boil for most beers. And then you'll have Wort into your fermenter. We're just going to go ahead and put 5 gallons, but if you're doing a different volume, you can definitely put that. Sometimes I do 5.5 or 6 gallons, and then it'll tell you the amount of water needed. So after you've done all of this, it calculates your totals automatically on this other side. So you don't need to put anything here. These are the outcomes based on your inputs here on this left side. So it's going to tell you your total water needed. This is basically all of the gallons you'll need. If you are getting spring water from the store, you'll know that you need to pick up 9 gallons because you're going to use 8.62 gallons here. If you are going to be using a hose with a filter like I do, this is less important of the total that you need, but more important as we go down the list here. Your next one is, if you're going to be using these volumes, then you're going to need to have a mash tun that at least has 4.95, so basically 5 gallon mash tun at a minimum. The next one is the most important as you're going to be starting, because what amount of water do you need right away? This is your mash or your strike water. This is the one that you're going to be putting in your grains first to start your mash. That is 4.24 gallons. I usually round this to the closest quarter gallon, so in this case I would put 4.25. I have quarter marks on my kettle, so I go ahead and I would fill that up to 4.25, and then I would heat it to this strike temperature here. So we're going to kind of ignore the HTL, which is hot liquor tank temperature right now, for just a moment, but the strike temperature you're going to want to heat up to 163.6, and that's going to allow you to, based on the amount of grain and that grain temperature, for you to hit this 152 degrees. That's why this matters, right? If it's a cold day and your mash tun is cold, you can either preheat it with some boiling water, or I would raise the strike temperature up a couple of degrees. It's easier to go down than it is to go up in temperature. So I would error and even go to 165 if you need to ensure it's a cold day and make sure that your mash tun is, maybe it's a little cold, it's been sitting out the garage or something like that, and you want to make sure that you're accounting for that heat loss, being that the container is cold. And so you can always throw an ice cube in or stir that around until it gets to that mash temperature, but I would err on the side of being hotter rather than colder when you add this amount. Then after you pour in your strike water, you stir it up real good and you let it sit for 60 minutes. This is the next one is your first runnings. This is how much you'll get after you do your vorlaughing and you drain into your kettle for your first runnings. You're going to have some amount of volume loss because of all of the grains and things that we talked about in your equipment profile. Based on the 12 pounds of grains that you have in there, your first running should be about 2.44 gallons, or just under 2.5 gallons. Then we're going to be talking about your Sparge volume. Your Sparge volume is 4.38. So again, this is right around, or I would just do just under 4.5 gallons. And then we're going to talk about strike temperature. If you're doing a fly Sparge, where it's a continuous fly into the from your hot liquor tank into your mash tun, this temperature can be the same at 163.6 because it'll continue to rinse the grains as it comes out of your hot liquor tank and rinse down your grains. What I do is as a batch Sparge. So what I'll do is I'll drain my first runnings. I will put in this Sparge volume into my kettle again. I will heat this thing up to 180 degrees, somewhere between 170 180 degrees, but most of the time 180. Then I will pour that back into, I'll shut my mash tun, I'll pour that back in and do what they call batch Sparge, which means I'll let it rest again, mix it up real good, let it rest again for 15 or 20 minutes, and then I will vorlaugh and drain out the remaining volume, and that will rinse the grains. That higher temperature helps to pull off a lot more of those sugars off the grains, and then you should have a total runoff, which shows here at the bottom. This will be your pre-boil level of your Wort. This is also important because you need a kettle that's big enough to have whatever this total runoff is before you start boiling. So in most cases, folks get a 10-gallon kettle. In this case, our volume would be just under 7 gallons or 6.75-ish gallons or so. And then you're going to go ahead and start your boil. And then after that, it's just, adding your hops, cool it down, pitching your yeast, and everything else that is shown on our brew day. So if you have questions about this whole process or about this calculator at all, feel free to leave some comments in the video description below.
And that's going to wrap up the Mash and Sparge calculator video. Hope you guys learned something. This tool is really important. It helps you simplify your brew day. You're just going to plug in the information into this calculator, and then once you put all that stuff in, it's going to give you the amounts that you need to make your brew day a success. So you don't really need to do all those calculations in your head or on paper. This thing's going to do it for you. And so once you've mastered this down, you can quickly do it before your brew day, and you'll hit the ground running, and it'll make your brew day go that much faster. So I hope you liked it. Check out my other videos in the link description. Also, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe button. And with that, happy brewing and cheers.